Good morning. Songs from my cell. And this is episode 3, taken from chapter 4 of a reworked book I brought out years ago, To the Light. Chapter is Flame, and the light is leading us towards the final song on this chapter, Flame. But before we get there, there's all sorts of stories and songs to sing, and a few weeks prior to my applying for a visa to visit the US, I was asked to sing my song El Salvador outside the American Embassy in Dublin to mark the anniversary of the brutal murder of a group of Jesuit priests during the Civil War there. Conditions weren't ideal on the day of the protest. It was raining cats and dogs, and there was a mad breeze rattling the placards outside the embassy gate. Beneath a priest's extended brolly, with my guitar strapped around my neck and my son Ronan standing by my side, I glanced at a window of the circular embassy building behind a flapping flag of stars and stripes, and I started singing at the top of my voice, hoping I wasn't being photographed for CIA files. I haven't actually sang this one in a long time. I always maintained that people who actually lived there would write a much better song than this. But it was included in a book of poetry in El Salvador. And I was asked to sing it once in the Mansion House in Dublin. A girl cries in the early morning, woken by the sound of a gun. She knows somewhere someone is dying, bleeding in the rising sun. Outside the window of her cabana, shadows are full of her fear. She knows her lover is out there somewhere. He's been fighting now for a year to heal the sore of El Salvador. The moon, like a skull, is over the country. The sky to the east is blood red. The general wakes up and takes his coffee while he sits on his bed. Outside the barracks, soldiers are marching back with their guns in their hands. General goes out, salutes his army, and issues new commands. He makes the guns roar in El Salvador, and bells ring out in a chapel steeple. A priest prepares to say mass. A sad congregation come tired and hungry to pray their troubles will pass. Meanwhile the sun rises over the dusty streets where the bodies are found. Flies and mosquitoes are drinking from pools of blood where a crowd gathers round to cry for the toll of El Salvador. And out on the rancho the rich man's preparing to go for his morning ride. We've saddled his horse out in the corral. He walks out full of pride. He looks like a cowboy from one of those movies a U.S. president made in the past. Peasants in rags stand back for El Rico. They know he gallops so fast over the soul of El Salvador. Yeah, it's a long time ago since I wrote it after watching a documentary, and Christy Moore featured a version of this ballad on his Ride On album. After that, other singers started recording my songs. Maybe it was coincidental again, but this change in my fortunes coincided with my return to religious practice. Set on a hill with a spire like a mast and a regular bell, the chapel I attend sits like a ship gone aground in a swell. But in some ways, that's the way it's kind of meant to be, really. I started attending daily mass in the early 80s, almost against my will at first, as I knew that the practice was completely out of step with most, if not all, of my contemporaries who had long since given up on religion. Going to the chapel on the hill was often a lonely experience, especially midweek when the entire congregation consisted of no more than a handful of elders. Once, as I was taking my place in my customary pew near the back of the almost empty church, the thought struck me that I attracted more of an audience to my poorly attended gigs than our parish priest drew to his weekly services, despite his being one of the finest priests in the city. Father Lawless, your name belies the order the word on your tongue brings to our lives. Religious practice made me reassess my life completely, and from the revaluation evolved a plan to formulate my song work through spiritual guidelines. I had always believed in inspiration, though I was never quite sure of its origin. Now I deliberately began to pray intensely for divine assistance in a systematic way, and my prayers were answered. Though I had a backlog of 60 or 70 unrecorded songs, not counting the hundreds, if not thousands, of rejects dispensed with along the way, there was no clear order to the collection. Slowly, this began to change. After a false start of recording Family Album, the first edition of the Voyage collection, for an independent Irish record company that demanded an input into shaping the work, I broke free during the recording of Just Another Town and produced the first edition of that album at my own expense, in my own fashion, without compromise, and I went on from there to work independently of the music industry from then on. Though Just Another Town received harsh criticism from some pop reviewers when I first released it, understandably maybe because I'd started out in the rock-pop field, it later gained high praise from the well-respected writer and broadcaster John McKenna in his RTE radio series Song People, which dedicated 2 full programs to my work. John suggested that what made Just Another Town special was the cohesive theme of community that underscored the work. Soon after I produced the first edition of Just Another Town, and as a direct consequence of reflecting on the community aspect of the album, I joined the charitable organisation St. Vincent de Paul and started visiting the poor and disadvantaged in my spare time. In thoughts of others, in memory of Mary Kavanagh. On stormy nights, on muddy route to visitations, rain-soaked and wind-lashed, I've often wondered why we do it. At worst, we're duped by those we help. At best, we do them little good. But there's also the almost selfish reason that informs the heart, even in the hardest weather, of the peace we gain when we forget ourselves in thoughts of others. One young woman that my co-worker Mary and I started calling on was Mona, a lone parent of 3 children whose estranged partner, Norman, was just out of jail after a 2-year stretch for burglary and aggravated assault. Though Mona had taken a barring order out on Norm, we started breaking into her council house and beating her up whenever the drunken whim took him. Norm. Eventually the police managed to warn Norm off and he stopped tormenting the poor woman. For 2 or 3 months, we gave Mona a sympathetic ear along with the financial assistance, and when her mental state improved, we stopped calling on her. A few years went by and Mona contacted us again, seeking financial help after the birth of a new child. Presuming that she'd patched things up with Norman, we called on her in some trepidation and discovered that she had a new man in her life, Dickie. Dickie, a shady-looking character who greeted us with a smarmy smile and a defensive assurance, unasked for, that he was unemployed. After a brief interview with Mona, we agreed to assist her and started calling with food vouchers every Monday night. During this time, we made the grim discovery that Dickie had another family in a nearby estate that he didn't and that he divided his time with, as well as owning his own apartment in a different part of town. Puzzled as to how he could afford to support 3 households on social welfare, we made some discreet inquiries and learned that Dickie was a small-time drug peddler. Concerned for the children, we confronted Mona with the discovery, but she flatly denied that either she or Dickie had any involvement with drugs. After some more probing, our suspicions were confirmed that Dickie was in fact involved in the drug trade on a small scale. But when we broached the subject with Mona, she became confrontational and told us to F off out of the house. Months went by and we heard nothing more of Mona. Then one frosty mid-December afternoon, while we were distributing Christmas hampers to other families in the neighbourhood, we paid Mona a courtesy call to wish her seasonable greetings and found her in dire straits, strung out in some heavy drug, almost oblivious of her gaunt-faced children huddled together beneath a grubby blanket in an ice-cold room that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. We helped the family over the festive season, but soon after Christmas, Mona's 4 children were taken into state care, and Mona was warned that she wouldn't get them back until she went through an extensive rehab course, which she agreed to do. After 6 or 7 months of attending this program, Mona's children were returned to the family home, and Mona started rebuilding her life with Dickie out of the equation. Over the 25 years I've worked with SVP, we have assisted countless families in similar, though not so extreme circumstances. But one poor soul slipped through our net. Regret. A man I saw regularly drinking wine beneath a bridge, while on my steady way to Mass, jumped in the river and drowned. Now, in my mind, I often find myself standing by the water's edge, talking to the man, long after the last bell has stopped ringing. And I leave you. One of the reasons I joined St. Vincent de Paul was, this isn't in the script here now, but I just thought I'd sing it anyway. But one reason I joined was because I was asked, and I reflected back to when I was 15 and I stayed in a St. Vincent de Paul night shelter in Dublin. When I went there for a Rolling Stones concert and ended up actually staying with real Rolling Stones. I remember very little of the Rolling Stones concert, but I remember everything about staying in a DOS house or a shelter, night shelter for the homeless. "100 miles from his home, through a lonely city he roams, till he finds a bed he doesn't own, in a house full of rolling stones. There he can lay his head down, there he can relax his frown, there he can dream of his hometown. In his sleep his troubles drown. But when he wakes up and takes his first look at his tattered surroundings, when he awakes, when his dream breaks, he asks himself, how can I survive another day of being alive, till the evening comes? 100 miles from his home, he's nothing left to call his own, just the rags for his bones and the memory of his home. And as he gets out of the bed, sadness starts to cloud his head. His heart fills with dread, almost wishes he were dead. For when he wakes up and takes his first look at his tattered surroundings, when he awakes, when his dream breaks, he asks himself, how can I survive another day of being alive, till the evening comes? 100 miles from his home, 100 miles from his home. Please pass this on and see you next week. Thanks.